How's it going, YouTube? Welcome to my poker channel. My name is Andreas Froehli, and in today's video I'm gonna look at the £1 million poker tournament happening in London right now. The Triton Super High Roller Series charity £1 million tournament is taking place. We got 27 businessmen battling it out for £19 million up top with 27 invited pros. 3 of them are Stephen Chidwick, Sam Trickett, and Kenney. Let's have a look at the sick hand that happened there.
Hey, let's take a look at the other featured pro tables. Trickett, Kenney, and Chidwick. Chidwick has flopped a flush. Looks like no action happened on the flop. It is raised pre-flop, but Trickett's got top pair and the ace of clubs. And he's continuing to check. It's very tricky from the small blind after it checks around on the flop.
I see what you did there. Tricky from Trickett.
Trickett.
I'm on to you. I get what you're doing. And this is it's amazing the pot's is small going to this juncture. You know, Bryn Kenney has a gut shot with the club, but Chidwick now, you know, has to feel very comfortable. Obviously, flopping a flush is rare, 118 to 1 odds.
And he checked it back on the flop.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
Interesting way of proceeding, but makes some sense. It also disguises your hand even more, but also pot control. Chidwick's got tricks.
He checks again.
That's a little wild.
He just thinks that no one has a piece. He's hoping someone catches up.
But is he though? Because like catch up still, if a one club rolls off a queen, king, or ace, either one of 2 opponents have. I don't know if you're necessarily looking for your opponents to, yeah, I guess catch up with the pair. I mean,
he's hoping someone just has like 8-9 and just hits like an 8.
Yeah, or makes a straight. Yeah, I mean, Kenney could make a straight. Very interesting.
So this is checked around the flop. It's checked around the turn. 16. And I like that Trickett is betting now because it's so unlikely someone has a 7. Likely, like Chidwick probably would have bet a 7 on the flop. You only got to worry about Kenney having a 7. And if he raises here, okay, probably easy to get away from ace-jack.
Yep. I'm curious. It'll be interesting what Chidwick does if he just calls.
So Kenney is currently in the tank, and he's wondering why did Trickett bet so small? Wow, he's going to reach for bluffing chips here.
What is going on? Wow.
Really
I mean, this is a peculiar hand selection all around.
I think I understand what Kenney's doing. The reason is if Trickett had a 7, he would bet bigger on the river because he only bet about a third of the pot. So he thinks Trickett is going for a...
This hand is really interesting. Let's start with Chidwick's perspective first. He checks back twice with a jack-8 of clubs. And, you know, this play basically has the upside that, you know, all of a sudden, if one of the blinds wants to overbet a blank river, now you have a really great candidate versus those overbets. And for example, if Kenney does something funky and all of a sudden starts putting in these large bets, then, you know, you have a really strong hand. And at the same time, it has not as much value to be betting as, for example, a flush without a jack. If you have the jack-8 of clubs here, not only is it exactly the weakest jack suited that you're opening from the hijack, it blocks these turn top pairs that both blinds could have. So your value or your value bet is going to make less money, you know, compared to, for example, a queen high flush, which doesn't block those turned top pairs. Now, unfortunately for him, the river pairs. So all of a sudden, the advantage or the nuttiness advantage probably shifts over to the blinds. For example, if we look at Kenney's range, he's going to have almost all the hands in the big blind, given his really great odds versus the 2x size and pre-flop. So he could have jack 7, 7, 4, even some of, you know, the offsuit combinations. And then he could have obviously pocket 3s, pocket 4s, still pocket 7s. That sums up to a lot of both combinations. And then if you think about Sam Trickett's range, he cold called the small blind. That's typically going to be a very narrow range that's capped at the top. So he's not going to have a lot of these overpairs because he would have been 3-betting with them the majority of the time. Also, he's going to be lacking some of the nut flushes on the river because you know, the stronger nut flush combinations, which are also not on the board, ace 10, ace jack, ace queen, ace king suited, they would, you know, a lot of the times obviously a 3-bet before the flop as well. But with having fewer combinations, the number of both combinations count a lot more than, for example, for Brian Kenney. He has pocket 3s, pocket 4s, and pocket 7s. Those are going to be 7 combinations out of a 10% flag call frequency. There's going to be a bunch of boats on the river. Now on the river, he decides to bet small, a third of the pot with top pair, top kicker. Now trying to get value from weaker Jack X. And maybe some of the pocket pairs that both his opponents could still have. And he could obviously also bet this sizing with a lot of other hands, with some trips, with some flushes, and also some boats to basically then induce a raise with a lot of hands. It gets to Kenney, who puts in a bluff raise almost to pot size with the 8-6 off. I do think that Brian Kenney could easily overbluff here because, he could take this bluff raise with a lot of hands. He could basically say, all right, I got a 4 or a 3 blocker and just, use that as a bluff raise with maybe a random club, for example, something like ace of clubs 4, ace of clubs 3. And then, he would have too many bluffs if he also takes like some of these 8-6, 8-5 offsuit type of hands that he has in the big blind with 1 club. Then he has a lot of bluffs. Well, on the other hand, if he thinks that Sam Trickett is weak and value betting thinly here, he could, for example, look for a bluff for a value raising range of a straight or better. But then even for those hands, maybe it's a big sizing, and maybe he's not going to get called by that many weaker hands if Sam Trickett believes him. Chidwick, having now slow played, now has underwrapped this end, and let's see what he ends up doing against this aggression.
Thin value bet with a jack. He's not worried about Chidwick having a 7 because his expectation is that Chidwick would bet a 7 on the flop. He also doesn't think Chidwick has a flush, although he actually has in this situation, because Kenney thinks that Chidwick would have either bet the flop or the turn if he had a flush. So Chidwick's going to make the call here. I would like to see Trickett get away from the ace-jack. I think when you see a cold call for 102K, given how small this pot was, this looks very strong. That definitely beats ace-jack.
It's interesting because Trickett has a key card here, although the board's paired. If the board doesn't pair, Trickett could even, you could really, it's that much, makes it that much more sense for him to like rip it in as you just almost have to get the credit for having it. But like now the board's paired, it's like, what is he, with this re-raise and a call, it's funny. And look at Chidwick, who extracts a lot of value all of a sudden with checking his hand twice, gets a random bluff in there from Bryn, random re-raise, and he's gonna, unless somehow, the only way would be if somehow Sam decided to turn his hand into a bluff, rip it in. I don't even know if that would work at this point, but I mean, it would look pretty ridiculous. I don't know, the board's paired.
Well, you can see the body language. Doesn't seem like,
wow!
I was going to say, it didn't seem like he's going to shove all
This
in
is
here.
insane hand.
Sam Trickett pulling the trigger here on the river, now 3-bet shoving after initially value betting as a bluff with the ace of clubs, jack of diamonds. And the question here is, mathematically, how often does this need to work? That's really important here. He's risking 460,000 here to win a pot of about 230. So he's risking 2 to 1. Therefore, his bluff has to work 2/3 of that time in order to turn a profit. Against 2 opponents, that basically means that they both have to fold with about an 82% frequency, which is quite high. If you think about Brian Kenney's raising range and then Chidwick's cold calling range, if they only together show up like with a fifth of their hands calling, then all of a sudden this play is not working. Now this is really, really interesting because Brian Kenney, as I mentioned before, he has an insanely wide range. So he might have all those boats, but at the same time, facing this small bet, he has also all these potential other raises he could use as straight or better. And he has so many flushes in his range that he cannot just simply, go ahead and, fold everything on the river beside a flush or beside a full house to not be exploitable. So if you know that Sam Trickett, has bluffs here on this river 3-bet shove, he has to call more hands than just boats. And I actually would have preferred if Brian Kenney ended up having a really high flush here, because that would have been probably even more interesting than Chidwick having the jack high flush. But let's have a look at what that spot ends up doing to basically Chidwick, and what kind of bluff catch decision he will make here.
Bryn, the sick part is Bryn was right that Sam was weak. He made a ridiculous play. Now Chidwick.
So everyone has kind of like one-upped everyone, like just kind of like.
This is crazy. Sam Trickett, who finished second in the one-drop original $1 million buy-in to Antonio Esfandiari in 2012 for a $10 million score. Here he is on the big stage in his home country town. Well, home country, I don't know exactly where he's from in England, but Sam Trickett, legendary bluff on the river, and Chidwick, who checked twice, sets up what he wants, and now we got Sam, the re-raise. I don't think he's going to call.
Well, so let's think about it from Chidwick's point of view. He's thinking, wow, did Trickett really check like a set or two pair on the flop to turn and only bet a third of the pot, win the 7 paired?
I'll tell you what, Chidwick is one of the most intimidating and regarded in the game now as maybe the best tournament player in poker, and on a paired board as well. If Sam is I think that's what he's thinking. I have a flush. Is Sam gonna bluff with the dry ace when the board's paired on this action? So from his mind, it's even he's basically repping a boat, right?
Exactly.
I mean, he is repping a boat, but he has the ace of club hand, and this is high level all around. Really, one of the more interesting hands I've ever seen.
Yeah. So Chidwick is thinking.
Wow.
He's trying to break down the hand because he knows Trickett is capable of making really big plays. The thing is, would Trickett make this play with, say, a queen high flush, a king high flush? Would he make this with an ace high flush? Would he only do this with a boat because the board is paired? It's quite scary. Chidwick knows his hand looks very under-repped because he checked back the flop, he checked back the turn. Most certainly, if Chidwick had a set, he would have bet already. And
Stephen Chidwick folds a river here, and you can't blame him. After all, in this river, he's really capped. Now a lot of boats possible by both the players, and facing this, insane aggression by 2 players, having just a jack high flush in there would be a really tough call to make. He'd have to have some read of some sort. Also knowing again that Trickett has a narrow cold call range from the small blind and could easily have a boat here. Now, again, if you want to look at the river from the bluff catcher's perspective, so Stephen Chidwick and Brian Kenney has to do the majority of the calling here, because he's going to have, stronger hands. And then, the line that Chidwick took is actually so rare, checking back, and then now facing bet in the raise to just cold call. It's just not going to happen very often. And as I said, with a capped range. So, in these spots, it could be easily that Stephen Chidwick ends up having, just these, slow play bluff catchers and, not really that much else. But, it would be super interesting to hear from him, how he would basically construct his ranges in a way that he could still, what kind of bluff catchers he could still show up with on the river that are much better than his hand, given that he has an hijack opening raise range. Also, some very interesting thing to note here, Matthias Eibinger, after this hand, mentioned that he would have preferred a bluff of Trickett, I think, with 7-8 suited. At least that's how I understood it. And that's also something interesting to think about. I think I like ace of clubs jack because it blocks all these nut flushes from Brian Kenney. And if we think that Brian Kenney has to call more than boats, and also some of these flushes having like the calling responsibility, then removing some of these better bluff catchers that he could have is actually a good thing. And blocking some of the boats is also obviously good. So having 7-8 suited and blocking all these 7-4 jack 7 type of hands having previously also value bet trips makes a lot of sense too. So weighing up ace-jack offsuit versus 7-8 suited is a very interesting thought here. And yeah, that's what I would love to debate with someone, and having to hear those explanations for someone like Matthias Albing on this, and what he thought about like the 7-8 suited on the fly, because he basically said it right afterwards. And how fast do you have to be to basically figure out these things just observing the hand. It's pretty high level poker. What else can we expect from a $1 million tournament? Now I want to ask you guys, okay, what do you think of this hand? Let me know in the comment section below. Pretty sick one, I would say. And then I'm gonna probably make some more hand analysis from this £1 million tournament in London. See you guys next time.